The 17th of September 1944. What if I told you that one of the boldest Allied plans of World War II began with church bells ringing in peaceful Dutch towns and ended with medics crawling through blood-soaked streets under machine gun fire, whispering prayers over boys who were still calling for their mothers, and that for 9 straight days hell felt close enough to touch. Operation Market Garden was supposed to be the fast track to victory. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's high-risk gamble to leap across the Netherlands, seize a chain of bridges, and punch straight into Germany before Christmas 1944. And on paper, it looked clean, almost elegant. Airborne troops would drop from the sky in Operation Market, while ground forces rolled north in Operation Garden, linking up across key bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and the grand prize at Arnhem. A stone archway over the Lower Rhine that everyone swore would be the final door into the Third Reich. But war never reads the script. And by the afternoon of that first Sunday, the sky above Holland was roaring with more than 1,500 aircraft as paratroopers from the US 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions and the British 1st Airborne Division drifted down under white and colored silk canopies, some landing in open fields, others in orchards. A few right into German defensive positions that no one believed were there, because Allied intelligence had underestimated the presence of hardened SS panzer units refitting near Arnhem, including elements of the 2 SS Panzer Corps. And suddenly the lightly defended corridor turned into a meat grinder. Picture it like this: a medic from the 101st hits the ground near Sun, bullets snapping past his ears before he can even unclip his chute. And within minutes he's sprinting toward a blown bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal, because German engineers have just detonated it in his face. And now that single blast has turned a timetable into chaos. Tanks stalled, radios crackling, officers shouting coordinates that don't match reality. And the whole plan starts wobbling like a table missing a leg. Down in Nijmegen, the 82nd Airborne faces the Vaal River, crossing on the 20th of September 1944. And if you think that was just another river assault, think again. Because American paratroopers paddled flimsy canvas boats across a wide, exposed stretch of water under direct German fire. Tracer rounds skipping across the surface like angry fireflies. Men falling into the current, some drowning under the weight of their gear, others clawing onto the far bank with hands torn raw, and medics right behind them dragging the wounded into shallow depressions in the mud. Hands shaking but steady enough to clamp arteries and push morphine syrettes into trembling thighs. Now shift your eyes to Arnhem, where the British 1st Airborne, including Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's battalion, actually reached the northern end of the bridge on the 17th of September and held it for days against relentless counterattacks. And this is where the horror creeps in slow and heavy, because the narrow streets became corridors of smoke and shattered brick. Houses turned into strongpoints, and German armor rolled in closer than anyone predicted. Tigers and self-propelled guns blasting through walls that moments earlier had sheltered Dutch families. And inside those broken rooms, medics worked by candlelight, tearing curtains into bandages, stacking the dead in corners because there was nowhere else to put them, whispering, "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me," while outside the clatter of machine guns never really stopped. By the 21st of September, the situation at Arnhem had deteriorated into what survivors later described as a nightmare you couldn't wake from. Supplies were low, radios failed, and the promised ground relief from the 30th Corps was crawling up a single narrow highway that German forces nicknamed Hell's Highway, cutting it repeatedly with ambushes and artillery, turning that road into a ribbon of wrecked trucks and burning Shermans. And every time it was reopened, another convoy tried to surge forward, only to be hit again. Like watching hope rise and get punched in the mouth over and over. One medic later recalled moving through a schoolhouse, converted into an aid station where the floors were slick and the air thick with cordite and blood, stepping over bodies because there was no space left. And in the dark corners you could hear wounded men delirious with fever, calling out to wives they might never see again. And that's the part history books often summarize in a sentence, but never let you feel in your bones. Operation Market Garden officially ran until the 25th of September 1944. And by the end, the British airborne troops at Arnhem were forced to withdraw across the Rhine in a desperate, nighttime evacuation under rain and artillery fire, leaving thousands killed, wounded, or captured, with total Allied casualties exceeding 17,000, making it one of the costliest operations of the war's Western Front. And that final bridge at Arnhem remained in German hands. The bridge too far, that proved ambition can outrun logistics and optimism can blind even seasoned commanders. Yet inside that failure were moments of raw heroism that still hit hard today, like medics who refused evacuation, who kept crawling into open streets to drag back the wounded, while rounds snapped inches from their helmets, who cracked dark jokes to keep 19-year-olds from breaking down, who learned to work by sound when smoke made sight useless, feeling for pulses in the dark as if reading Braille written in blood. And yes, there were flashes of humanity too. Dutch civilians risking execution to hide Allied soldiers in attics and cellars, sharing the last of their food during what would become the brutal hunger. Winter, and you can't talk about Market Garden without talking about that civilian suffering that followed when the offensive stalled, and German reprisals tightened their grip. Some historians argue Montgomery's plan was fatally flawed from the start. Others say it was a gamble worth taking in a war that had already devoured millions. And even today, military academies dissect those September days like a case study in courage colliding with miscalculation. But strip away the maps and arrows, and what you're left with are young men dropped behind enemy lines believing they were racing toward the end of the war, and instead finding themselves trapped in a shrinking perimeter where every shadow could hide a sniper and every knock on a cellar door might be a patrol. Imagine being a medic under fire in Arnhem on the night of the 23rd of September. Rain mixing with ash, hearing tanks grinding closer in the dark, knowing evacuation boats may never reach you, and still choosing to move toward the screaming instead of away from it. Because that's the job, that's the oath. And that's the thin line between chaos and compassion in combat. Operation Market Garden did not end the war by Christmas. It did not open the road straight into Germany. But it exposed the limits of airborne warfare when coordination falters and intelligence fails. And it carved stories of endurance into the cobblestones of Dutch towns that still remember the sound of parachutes snapping open overhead. So here's the real question that lingers like smoke after the guns fall silent. When ambition promises a quick victory, but the ground reality turns into a corridor of fire, do we call it failure? Or do we measure it by the men who held a bridge against impossible odds and the medics who kept crawling back into the nightmare to pull one more heartbeat out of the dark? And if you were there on the 17th of September, 1944, hearing the engines fade and the shooting begin, would you have stepped forward or frozen in place? And what does that say about courage when history puts you on the edge of a bridge too far?